Explained by the Billy Meier Contacts. Mysteries, myths, legends, conspiracy theories, historical inaccuracies, and more. Compiled by David Chance, revised October 18, 2023.
Long skulls, artificial cranial deformation. See also Easter Island Moai heads. See also Nazca lines. Contact Report 069.
The Earth human is misguided if he or she wants to make the concerns of Easter Island an isolated concern. The events of earlier times on this island are in direct connection with the country, which you still call Tiahuanaco today, as it was called already at earliest time, in spite of past repeated changes. Easter Island and Tiahuanaco are more than 5,000 kilometers apart, and yet they are directly related to each other. However, the history of the connection goes back to very early times and ended only 2,548 years ago, calculated back from today, 1976 for 572 before Emmanuel. As I once explained to you, the last decisive settlement of the Earth by extraterrestrial intelligences took place about 13,500 Earth years ago. As you know, several of the immigrant horde became renegades, including a man in the rank of a half-Ishwish called Viracocha, who was already very old and extremely power-hungry. His name is still handed down on the Earth today, but with a small change, because for a long time now he has only been called Viracocha, and also as Jeshwish, although he was only in half the rank of such a person. Under his patronage and his cruel leadership, the highlands of Tiahuanaco, at an altitude of about 4,000 meters, were conquered, as was the Delta Island, which you call Easter Island. After this conquest, Viracocha settled with a special bodyguard of cherubim on the small island Mott, which is situated in front of Easter Island and which you call Motunui, or similar to my knowledge today. At that time it was called Mott because the cherubim were animal-human life forms. In this case, they were all bird-like. Mott means bird in our original language, so the island was called the Mott Island, or also the Island of the Bird People, as it is still called today. So Viracocha or Viracocha resided there. He and his followers, escaped Lirans like many others who came to the Earth, were of gigantic physique, by earthly measure about 11 meters tall. They were the ones who taught the dwarfish, normal-growing inhabitants of Tiahuanaco and Easter Island, who were procreations between Earthlings and previously immigrated intelligences from the vastness of the universe, in many things, providing them with their own highly developed technology and teaching them how to operate the devices and machines. Thus, they also taught the natives of Tiahuanaco and Easter Island the work of stonemasonry, and they let themselves be celebrated as gods. With the help of the giants and their machines and other equipment, the natives worked many meters, large head formations out of the lava stone, placed these, also with the help of machines, randomly around the island. Similar events took place in the areas you call Pisco, Nazca, and Sacsayhuaman because the same giants had settled there. Thus many statues and other structures were created, whereby also the shape of the spaceships on Easter Island were reproduced from rocks of the lava walls, which have survived to this day, namely oval-shaped stones, because the spaceships had this shape. After several centuries, the exact time is also veiled to us. The giants were attacked by a sudden epidemic that was unknown to them and cost the lives of many of them. Finding no cure for the epidemic, they fled Earth in their spaceships, set off into space, and have since disappeared. Despite the most eager investigations of our scientists, no trace of them has been found to this day. There is therefore the possibility that, despite their flight from Earth, They were attacked and killed by the mysterious plague in their spaceships, while their ships shot aimlessly through space, were attracted by some star and smashed to pieces. Our probability calculations very much favor this.
Contact Report 229.
As a rule, the Nazcans were people with high skulls, which means that their skulls showed an exceptional long skull form, which was not of original origin. This skull form was artificially produced. As long as the skull was still formable, it was restricted and bound with grinded metallic, stony, and wooden plates, forcibly leading to a skull of long form and resulting in an oblong deformation. This procedure was even started with newborns when they were 1 week old. Everything was not an ideal of beauty, but a tribute to the gods, to give them obsequious reverence. Only those Nazcans were permitted to have and wear the oblong skull form who were of higher class, that is to say about 85% of the population. The remaining 15% were lower people, who had to perform slave duty and similar tasks, and who were looked upon as social misfits, etc., and whose well-being or non-well-being, and therefore their life was laying in the hands and will of the higher ones, and especially of the priests.
Contact Report 710.
With this, I can say that the Earth foreigners, who are generally simply called extraterrestrials or aliens by the Earthlings, have in fact been around for a long time. They stayed here and worked in many ways, as did their distant descendants, but they have also been active on Earth for centuries and millennia up to the present day, flying around and in and out of the Earth, and are observed again and again around the world by the Earthlings, whereby the American continent is of particular importance in this respect. Their early ancestors worked in many different ways on Earth, and also in various countries in Asia, North Africa, and partly in Europe, but mainly in the early days in the North African country, which in later times was called Kemet, and then finally in later times Egypt, after which this name has been preserved until today. Your father Svath taught me during a leap in time into the past to the land there, where the Earth foreigners ruled at that time, whom he called Long Skulls, and whom I have seen myself, that they had been on Earth for thousands of years. Because, in contrast to the round skulls of the human beings of Earth, they had skulls that were long and thickly protruding towards the back. They stood out unmistakably from the human beings of Earth, just as other Earth foreigners did around the world, such as giants up to about 3 meters tall, half-small people with large and somewhat V-shaped heads and excessively large eyes. Various such long skulls have also been found in modern times by archaeologists, etc., although to this day people still puzzle over what secret is connected with these skulls, which were not from human beings of the Earth, but belonged to Earth aliens. But what I still have to say with regard to the land of Egypt in early times, and thus long before antiquity and the time of the pharaohs, is the following. At that time, the country looked completely different from what it does today. For on the one hand, I can remember that the Nile had another large river branch to the left of its course, which flowed through a very large and long valley, whereby the Nile itself also ran much more westwards than is the case today. There was also a large city in the Great Valley, where I also saw long skulls. Now, in another large city than the one in the Great Valley of the Nile tributary, I could observe other long-headed as well as normal-headed people who were the actual rulers of the land of Kemet, to which Svath explained to me that their early ancestors had been coming to Earth for millennia, probably for more than 75,000 years, when they also built the first Great Pyramids, which were then repeatedly dismantled and rebuilt in the course of time, which I could observe for myself through another journey into the past with Svath. The last time this happened was around 5,000 years ago, but before that it was also 6,000 years ago and more than 12,500 years ago. This also happened with the peoples in South America and Asia, where the long-skulled, the Earth foreigners, and the other Earth foreigners, who were physically Earth foreign, normal-skulled or small and big-headed and big-eyed, but also giants, as for example in South America, were also involved and had a culturally completely different influence on the Earth peoples on all continents. As a result, different buildings, villages, cities, cult objects and pyramids as well as sites with large menhirs were also created all over the world, such as Stonehenge in England, near Avesbury in Wiltshire, about 13 kilometers north of Salisbury, and in Armenia the Stonehenge or megalithic fields in Zorakara, near the mighty mountain ranges of the Caucasus, whereby the techniques of the earth foreigners were used in transporting and erecting the megaliths, which weighed many tons. Under the direction of the long-skulled, villages, cities and pyramids were also built in early Egypt, as were also a few areas in Europe, where there were still huge forests at that time, although the northern regions of the earth were for the long-skulled and the other earth foreigners, such as the small big-headed and big-eyed, as well as for the normal-headed, because, on the one hand, they preferred warmer climes and were therefore dependent on fertile land in warmer areas, as well as on many human beings whose help they needed as laborers and whom they could also dominate and rule.
Regarding what you said about the long skulls, it should be mentioned that Earth humans have made various efforts to imitate these long skull forms, namely by constricting and shaping the still soft and growing skulls with the open fontanelles of babies and growing children for years shortly after birth. This resulted in proportionally the same long skull effect as in the elongated skulls, but with certain differences, whereby the artificial long skull formation was recognizable.
Contact Report 721.
When then, about 13,500 years ago, the up-to-then last Pleiaren community of immigrants came to Earth, then this happened in a completely secret form, namely because since the time of 389,000 years earlier, other extraterrestrials had come to the Earth in the meantime and had settled down far and wide on all continents, above all the long-skulled ones. In ancient Egypt in particular, they rose to positions of power, waged wars, and subjugated tribes of peoples, such as those who called themselves Ebrea.
The Earth foreigners who ruled in various pre-ancient countries on Earth, such as the Long Skulls, who exercised their might especially in the areas around the Nile and in the southland of the American continent.
Contact Report 743.
The huge area of Huetap alone and the great city of the same name, Huetap, which existed 3,500 years ago in what is now Honduras, was monstrous as far as I was concerned, whereby the long-skulled also worked there and had a pyramid built, just as the long-skulled did in Egypt, in the Balkans, and in Asia, and so on.
Contact Report 795.
Sfath also experienced this, so his real age was to be calculated with more years. But with him, I not only learned a lot through journeys into the past and the future, which proved to me today that many things are not true what the scientists assume and spread as truth. Many things were really quite different from what they claim. For example, what actually happened with the Maya, or with other ancient peoples, and that foreigners really did come to Earth from other worlds, from far away and outside the Sol sphere of influence, from the distant expanses of the Dern universe, also the long skulls. What I wrote at that time, when it was, I do not remember, in response to a request to after which began. The long-skulled were also in Babel, in Egypt, in South America, and in Asia, where they ruled, whereby Sfath gave me the opportunity to check everything.
Contact Report 826.
So also, for example, with regard to extraterrestrials who really came here, such as the long-skull ones who came from outer space and to Earth, as Sfath said, but which I should not say, and keep silent about. However, they were human beings who were also able to mix with the human beings and did so, such as the long skulls and the giants and dwarves, of whom there is talk in fairy tales, who had instilled and taught the early Earthlings many things. But also the journeys to Egypt at that time are to be mentioned, especially the long-skulled people, who were strongly represented there, as they also established themselves as a people in South America, as well as somewhere in Asia, from which many Huns later emerged as descendants. The long-distance travelers from the cosmos were compatible with the human beings and also mingled with the human beings' women, whereby their tendency for long skulls spread in such a manner that the humans of various regions imitated their long skulls, namely by binding their newborns' heads so that they deformed and the skulls became longer, so that over the years, long skulls also became common among certain human beings. In rare cases, this long skull has been preserved from ancient times until today, so that it can sporadically happen that a very distant descendant of the long skulls is born again, but as a pure earthling, whereby the long skull breaks through again in a genetically visible way.
Contact Report 829.
So, I think I may now speak openly and say that beings from the depths of the space of this universe visited the Earth before there were Earthlings. Since then, however, their descendants have come here again and again, creating many things for the human beings of the Earth in the last 390,000 years or so, which were often only achieved with hovering techniques. Whether the people who traveled far and wide were always persons of the same people, and also whether it was later their descendants who came here and who, I do not know. But it is to be assumed that the various groups were somehow connected. What is clear to me, however, is that some of the long-distance travelers rose up as gods, who were then worshipped by the Earthlings, and to whom human sacrifices were also made. Some of them were real giants of different sizes, but there were also human beings of normal sizes, and then also dwarfs of normal size, thus not microsomic human beings. Microsomia refers to humans with abnormally small bodies. And there were also long-skulled and tall-skulled people, which was then imitated by the Earthlings by integrating the skulls of infants. Svath explained that most of these long-distance travelers had mixed with the Earthlings all over the world, so that it would also be the case in the distant future that tall stature, long-skulledness, and tall-skulledness would be preserved, and that Earthlings of this kind would be born again and again if they traced back to the lineages of the mixing at that time.